night and welcome to In Touch on Choice TV. I'm your host, Jadia Japie Emmanuel. This and every Monday will take you on an informative, exciting and honest journey on matters related to governance, politics and social commentary. In Touch, as the name suggests, is designed to keep you updated on current affairs. On this show, you will hear from the policymakers, the advisors, the technocrats, and the decision makers on a variety of issues. This will also be the avenue to respond to a lot of the misinformation that usually leads to the formation of strong opinions rooted in political mischief. In the weeks leading up to the introduction of this show, I've heard two main criticisms that I will address before we proceed into our discussion tonight. The first question is, can Jadia really ask the tough questions? This seems to matter only when I'm interviewing the Prime Minister or members of his cabinet. On a weekly basis, I interview public servants, heads of statutory organizations, and there seemed to be no concern. This has led me to believe that there seemed to be an interest in ensuring that politicians or the decision makers are placed in a position of discomfort, as opposed to ensuring that the truth and information related to government is disseminated to the public. And so for those who seek an avenue such as the former, they will never be satisfied, as this show is not designed to demonize or polish anyone. Usually, individuals would represent who they are by their actions and their pronouncements. This show will be an avenue for the dissemination of information. The mission is to ensure that at the end of every program, you are in a position to make decisions based on the truth. In any event, this is a live show, and so you will always get the opportunity to ask the questions that you think are the tough questions. The second concern is that by me hosting a talk show, this will erode the neutrality of the post of Press Secretary to the Prime Minister. And so I ask, since when is the Press Secretary to the Prime Minister a diplomatic post, as some people have suggested? Is it not the Prime Minister who directs the work program of his Press Secretary? The truth is, in my position, it is impossible to stay clear of the politics. After all, my post is a political one. And so you can expect the political guests on this show, and you can also expect the political discourse. What you should expect also is that even when our views differ, there will always be a platform of respect. I welcome you on board this new journey. I welcome our listeners who are with us tonight on RSL 97. And I wish to thank especially the management of Choice TV for this opportunity and the management of RSL for agreeing to have this simulcast of our first program. When we come back, I will introduce my guests for what I am sure will be a very informative and interesting discussion. Stay tuned, we'll be right back. Welcome back to In Touch here on Choice TV and also broadcasting on RSL 97. Tonight my guest is Senator Honorable Philip Lacorbiniere, who is the Minister for Legal Affairs, Home Affairs and National Security. A very fitting start to the program, I must say, given what is happening currently in St. Lucia, but it will also be an opportunity to shed some light and give some information on other matters related to his portfolio. I welcome you to the program, Minister, and thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Japie Emmanuel. I'm grateful for the opportunity, and I'm particularly happy because we have a current issue, and I think that we need some discussion on that current issue.
Yes. I think you have given me the opening to start and to go on with our discussion. The very hot topic would be the St. Lucia Fire Service.
Yes.
We are all aware that currently there is industrial action ongoing in the St. Lucia Fire Service. Last evening, the Prime Minister addressed this matter, and he issued a statement on the current situation at the St. Lucia Fire Service. Coming out of his statements, a number of pronouncements were made, and one which stands out is the secondment of the fire chief. And I believe coming out of this entire address, many persons were looking forward to the next step. What exactly would have happened the day after the Prime Minister's address? I'm sure you've had an opportunity to assess, and so what we would like to start off with is an update as to where we are, what is currently happening in the St. Lucia Fire Service.
Well, first of all, let me say that it's my understanding that the Fire Service Association, the outgoing association, met with its members with a view to assessing the discussions that they held on Friday with me and members of my ministry and my staff, and also in the context of the Prime Minister's address. Clearly, one would have anticipated that following on from that discussion, they would be in a position to make a statement. Because those discussions took place on their side during the course of this afternoon, we have not got the benefit of a formal a statement by the association, but it is my understanding that they have voted to continue with the strike action.
Now that we have gotten to this point, what really is the next step? Because this cannot continue for too long because of the impact that it would have on our economy. We have to take into consideration the safety of our citizens and to ensure that we're able to provide the vital services to the public. So what is the next step following on or assuming that there will be a continuation of the strike action?
Well, it's clearly very disappointing that the Fire Association and its membership have taken the position to continue with strike action. And I'd like to sort of go back in time a little bit, because I think it's important that the country as a whole begins to understand what is happening. And I'm going back a little to speak very shortly about the trade union movement. In the early days of the trade union movement, you had a lot of confrontation, even violent confrontation. But you have to understand the context. We were coming out of a position of pre-one man, one vote, where you had agitation at a social and political level to bring you into one man, one vote, and then into independence with its own challenges. But I think in 25 years ago, coming up, we began to see a bit of a shift in the approach by trade unions in this country, yes, and in the Caribbean, because there was an understanding that you had to begin to fashion the trade union movement in the context of rights and responsibilities. We had to understand that it could no longer simply be an issue of rights. There had to be a basic underlying tenet of responsibility. And I'm going to use a practical example. If you look at the tourism industry, for example, over the last 25 years, where you've had industrial action, unions have always been careful to ensure that they provide a minimum support system for activities to go on in a particular hotel plant. And this is not by accident. They have taken decisions as part of their strategy to ensure that a basic underlying principle is that they have to give consideration not just to the rights that they are exercising, but to a platform of responsibility. It's very saddening and very disappointing over the last few months to see that we are going, in a way, backwards on that issue. That we've moved from a sense that even in industrial relations, there has to be an expression of responsibilities. And the Fire Service Association is a very classic example. We've seen a number, since certainly for the last 2 years, going to 3 years, since this government is in office, we have seen the association taking a number of industrial actions. And it's noticeable that in all cases of that industrial action, there has been absolutely no attention placed to ensuring that a certain basic responsibility is adhered to. I believe we have to say to the country that the Fire Association is in charge of our ambulance service, not just the fire service, but the ambulance service. And that even heightens the responsibility that they have. And so in the discharge and exercise of their industrial rights, they have a basic underlying responsibility. They have had actions where their sole purpose has been to shut down the ambulance service, to shut down the airport service, and to cripple the entire fire and ambulance service. Is that a responsibility or a responsible approach to industrial relations? I believe we have to ask ourselves a question. And in this recent attempt by the fire service at industrial action, they have very much followed the same course of action. People may say, but the service is still running, we still see some fire officers. But that has been an individual choice by fire officers who believe for one reason or another that they cannot support the strike, or they are sympathetic but believe in this underlying value of responsibility.
But
and
Minister,
understand that there has to be a responsible approach to this issue.
I think I must ask you, what really is the issue in the St. Lucia Fire Service? Because I've heard pronouncements being made. In fact, very publicly, the call seemed to have been for the removal of the fire chief. And a lot of the criticisms and a lot of what was being said, all of the negative commentary seemed to be focused at the fire chief. Now that we have had an announcement made by the Prime Minister, which included the secondment of the fire chief, and we are seeing or hearing that the Fire Service Association is continuing with its strike action, and some pronouncement has been made that they're not satisfied and there are other people to go, and so on and so forth. And so I must ask, what really is the issue that has brought us to where we are today?
Well, there are a number of issues, but I just want to end my last point,
sure,
Mr. Chair, by saying that the further unfortunate situation on that issue is that other trade unions have joined into this and have also, whilst encouraging the fire service towards industrial action and indicating their full support, it's amazing that not one single organization in that configuration has spoken about the responsibility of the Welfare Association in this exercise. And so we have now a situation in the country that is ripe for people suffering, people dying, and things happening because of the absence of this focus on responsibility. Let me answer your question. The fire service has said that they wanted to see action taken in respect of the fire chief. I'm going to address that issue first, because as you know, the Prime Minister and also I have made statements on that issue, and I've been very firm that we had to adhere to the legal framework that is attendant to these matters. We could not simply say to the fire chief, and it would be both unlawful and unfair to say to the fire chief that he must go, or to transfer the fire chief. And the reason for that is that you had a commission of inquiry, but a commission of inquiry is not a court of law, and it is not the Public Service Commission. The Public Service Commission takes on the responsibility of managing these matters and taking the requisite decisions. And even where you have a commission of inquiry, the Public Service Commission can review the findings of the commission of inquiry. But over and above reviewing those findings, they also have a responsibility to go through the due process themselves and to allow for a fair hearing by all parties who are going to be affected in any given matter. So the suggestion that the Public Service Commission should just move on, should just take decisions, this is not the way that the business of the country can be run, and it's not the way the business of the country should be run. So I believe that this matter has been conducted in the proper way. And let me also say that what we have seen now with the Chief Fire Officer having agreed to go on secondment, this did not come as a result of the industrial action over the last week. We have been in negotiation. I and my office have been sitting down with the Chief Fire Officer now for at least 3 months in very delicate discussions to try to find a way out of this in relation to what needs to be done. And this is not to allocate any blame at the fire chief, because this is not what I'm here for. What we recognize is that the government needed some space to deal with this matter. The country needed some space to deal with this matter. And because of the acrimonious nature of this dispute, that space was closed. And so we needed to open that space to allow for an opportunity to make some headway in this matter. And I believe that throughout the discussions, the fire chief came to the conclusion and understood the point that was being made. So this is not to make a decision about the fire chief in the context of the report or in the context of anything that has been said by the association, because quite frankly, that again is a matter for the public service.
Right.
But we needed to find a space within which we could try to resolve this issue. And so the government was able, through discussions and through discussions at the level of our ministry officials and so on, to be able to bring us to this point.
So to be clear, the government or the executive did not overstep its boundaries and take on a role or responsibility that has been assigned to the PSC?
No, we did not. In fact, we were very careful to ensure that we did not do so. And this is why this matter took a while to be able to resolve, because we had to do it through dialogue, and we had to bring the point, and this is the point that I'm making here, that we needed a kind of space, an opening in the space, to be able to move forward with a number of the other issues that we have to address. Because the relationship and the tensions had become so dysfunctional and so great that it was making it difficult for us to be able to deal in a sustained way with some of these other issues.
Prime Minister says there has been a total breakdown of order and of respect in the fire service. And this suggests that the problem does not simply reside at the top. It is not simply a situation where you have to take action or have to review a certain section of the fire service. Some of the issues that continue to plague the fire service would include what exactly, and how does the government intend to deal with that problem? Because I see the management and the fire chief as only one element in the entire situation. Well,
there were a number of issues, and there are emerging issues all the time. So that, for example, over the last couple of months, there's been the emerging issue with the allegations by the association that they were locked out of their office, with the allegations that they were not allowed to pursue elections and therefore have a new association brought into being. So you can see that it's a dynamic. Even whilst we are trying to resolve some of the old issues, there's a constant dynamic which brings forward other issues that have to be resolved all the time. And I think it's important to say so, because if you look at the report done by the Commissioner, Dr. Alexis, you will see that Dr. Alexis points to a number of attempts at various solutions by the various governments and by the Ministry of Home Affairs and National Security over a period of time. And what he points to in the report, in terms of trying to resolve some of these issues, that is only part of what has gone on. For example, he reminds us that at some stage we brought together a small committee within the context of the public service to try to resolve some of these issues. And that committee laid out some recommendations. But over time, the very fire service, the association that had asked that we move and try to resolve some of these issues in a structured way, they began to object to the way in which the findings came out of that committee. And so you had again to go back, regroup, rethink, and the Prime Minister, you remember, announced the Commission of Inquiry.
Yes.
So I want to go back to this because many people are conveniently forgetting that before this Commission of Inquiry, there was a small group within the context of the public service. I believe at the time it had comprised either if I recall, permanent secretaries and deputy permanent secretaries. I think it might have been deputy permanent secretaries from the crucial ministries, had come together to look at some of these issues and to try to see how they could be resolved. So there is a history of trying to resolve this matter, contrary to what is being said in the public domain, and the impression that, you know, everyone has taken a completely hands-off on this issue. That is absolutely untrue.
There is a suggestion too that the tension and the manner in which the fire service is being operated has a lot to do with the laws. Some argue that there are no provisions for certain critical elements of running the service as it relates to discipline and matters of that sort. Where are we right now in terms of the review of our laws? Because I know that this issue came up at some point, and even during the inquiry as well, that there has to be a review to ensure that we modernize the service and to ensure that there are adequate laws to govern the critical elements of the service.
I believe it's important, again, to read the findings of the Commission of Inquiry, because the Commissioner was very careful to make a distinction between what can be done and what cannot be done in the short term. And in that regard, he pointed to the constitutional provisions and the protections that are enshrined within the context of the public service. And what he was basically saying is that to take it where it potentially should go, we would have to amend the Constitution of St. Lucia. And clearly...
Which in itself is a long process.
Well, I'll go further and say to you that it's a no process for the moment, because constitutional reform cannot simply be in relation to the fire service. And you know, we have a constitutional reform
report that is yet to be debated.
And we're also looking at the whole notion of advancing the constitutional reform. But if we have to do constitutional reform, it cannot be selective for the fire service. It has to come as part of this all-embracing constitutional reform that we are doing. So he makes that distinction. But he also pointed to a number of areas where he felt some adjustment in our legislation could be made. And quite frankly, most of the areas that he pointed to for adjustments are very minor things. But there are some fundamentals that need to be addressed. And I can also say to you that even over the last couple of months, as minister, I met with the Fire Association, and I also indicated to them that the time had come for us to try to move this process forward on the legislative side. And I invited them to take a review of what they had submitted in the past and to consolidate some of that, and again, to let us have some further thoughts from their side. And that is a point that I have made to them again on Friday, that if this process is going to go forward and include them in this process, they also have to renew their efforts to guide their concerns into this process.
Minister, you spoke of engagements with the Fire Service Association. Yeah. From some of the public pronouncements that I have heard recently, there seemed to be this suggestion that the minister has taken a hands-off approach, that the minister has been silent, and that the government has left the issues of the fire service up to the Public Service Commission to implement disciplinary action. In fact, many persons are saying there is so much that is going on. We are hearing threats of strike action, and the minister has not made public statements. We really do not know what the government's position is as it relates to this, but you seem to be suggesting that there has been a lot of engagement on, on a one-on-one level between the parties.
There has been a lot of engagement, and as minister, as soon as I came into office, I engaged the fire service. And in fact, the record would show that in most instances where I've had meetings with the association, those meetings have been called at the instance of the minister. So that's absolutely untrue. But let me also say and remind the country that ministers have a wide range of responsibility. Some of that responsibility requires, as minister, that you preserve, in times such as this, an opportunity to act in a mediatory and conciliatory role to facilitate resolution of issues. I have always been minded as minister of the fact that this issue has become highly contentious for all sides. And as minister, I've always acted in a way to try to preserve this capacity to mediate and bring the parties together and be available at all times to bring the parties together to resolve this issue. And if you notice throughout the term of office of my government, although in certain times I have made some hard pronouncements when I have felt that that things are being said and were very misleading in the public domain. As a general principle on this issue, I have tried to ensure that I preserve my ability to be able to bring the parties together and be able to manage this issue. And so I know when to be circumspect and when to talk. This sense, you see, people believe that you must talk and you must talk. You must also know when you have to keep quiet on an issue. And one of the things that I have always said in my political career and in my governance in the country is that in managing these issues, you take on the responsibility of a minister, not of yourself. You might want to jump out there and say, this is not true. But there are times, in the better interest of managing the problem before you, you have to take on a calmer persona, and you have to be more receptive to allow the parties to be able to come into the fold, and you manage that process of reconciliation.
But I must ask you just one question before we go to a break. The discussion, you know, between the Fire Service Association and the management of the fire service, did we get to the point where there was absolutely no engagement at all? Or was it a situation where there were constant attempts and, you know, the parties would meet but fail to find an agreement? Because well, I seem to be getting the impression that one does not recognize the other, and they're basically operating within the same space but with absolutely no kind of communication or engagement between the two.
Well, I think, again, you just have to read the Commission of Inquiry, the report. And if you read the report carefully, it puts a lie to a lot of statements that are being made in the media. Because in the very commissioner's report, he points to a number of actions where along the way attempts were being made to find a resolution and to ensure that the parties engaged. The problem, as I have said, is that if you're unable to resolve a matter, two things begin to happen. One, that matter starts to take on a bit of a life of its own. Mm-hmm. And as I have said before, additional matters come into the fray, and it becomes a lot more difficult to solve the issues. And that is what has been happening in this matter. That as we've moved and attempted to resolve some of these matters, as we've had some success, other matters have come into the fray, in some cases have derailed the movement towards success and have set us back quite a bit. And I point to a fairly recent, two matters at a fairly recent time. The first has been the issue with the association not being able to have an election, and the issue of what the association has described as a lockout of the offices. And these two issues, for example, over the last few weeks, have again come into the picture to again harden positions on the part of of both parties, quite frankly, and again to fracture any sense of proper progress, engagement in this matter. And this is what we have seen all along the way, that as we have tried to resolve some of these issues, there have been things that have come in. But let me also underscore the fact that there are some systemic things that we have not been able to address as quickly. For example, the whole issue as to the promotion policy. This has been a burning issue.
Yes.
And I should say to you that we had got fairly advanced in the promotion policy. In fact, it is at a point now where the ministry has finalized essentially that document, but it's under some measure of discussion within the ministry. And we were at the point of sending it finally back to management and the Fire Association for them to sign off on it. But events have obviously taken a certain course.
Understood. We'll go to a commercial break. When we come back, we will put the number on the screen so that we can get your phone calls. But before that, there is one issue that is pending in the Royal St. Lucia Police Force that we would like to get some comments on before we open the phone lines. So stay tuned. We'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back to In Touch. Our phone number is now on the screen. You can call in with your comments. For those who are listening to us live on RSL 97, the number is 452-7347. In a moment, we'll be taking your phone calls. But just before that, Minister, an update on the investigation into the alleged extrajudicial killings. I know this is another matter that you inherited when you became Minister for National Security. The government has taken action, but we are yet to hear any firm pronouncements as to where we are right now. So we'd like an update on that matter just before we go to the phone lines.
Okay. The position is simply this. When we started this investigation, as you know, we brought in a team from Jamaica. The preliminary round by that team, for a number of reasons, there were difficulties encountered on the ground in terms of the capacity of the team to begin to work in an effective manner. And so the preliminary round of that team, in a sense, was extremely slow. That meant that as time went on, we had to try to pick up. And so there was a bit of a delay in really getting to the meat of the matter. But I believe that it would be right to say that we're about 98% home with this. The team has advised the government of St. Lucia that there are a couple critical matters that they feel need some clarification before they finalize their report, and we are trying to ensure that they're able to address those matters before the report can be handed in. But I can say that we are almost there with the report.
About 98%?
Yes, from my understanding.
With that, we'll go to the phone lines. 452-7347 is the number on the line. Good night, caller. You are on the air. Hello, good night.
Good evening, Jadia.
Hello.
Let me say it's really a pleasure listening to you and your guest, Honorable Corbinier, on the topic.
Thank you.
I have been following this issue for a few months now, and in my opinion, I found that it was allowed to escalate, and I find it's one of the problems that we have publicly, in the public service, I should say, more likely, that we take a more reactionary approach to situations than a proactive approach. I listen attentively to the minister, and I agree that there may have been situations where persons would have used information disseminated to the public to their convenience, where there may be lies in his own words. And I was quite impressed when he said that he have handled situations not from a personal perspective, because he would not have come on the media and say, well, you know, you all told certain lies. But in that said, I still find that there have been certain high-handed approaches in how that situation was handled.
You care to share, when you say high-handed approaches, perhaps you can give us an example as to what approach, what situation exactly you felt could have been dealt with differently.
Okay. The Commission of Inquiry was completed, and I agreed. Actually, I was quite educated this evening when he said the Commission of Inquiry, or the Commissioner of an Inquiry, is not the one who makes the decision. It would have to be the Public Service Commission, etc., and that is quite respected. When the results came from the inquiry, did the minister have a meeting with the fire officers to say, look guys, we have gotten the report. They may not want to disclose all elements of the report because maybe Public Service Commission had to give some views, but at least to let them know they're addressing the situation. Because, Jadia, it was only last week on news, I saw live on television, the deputy fire chief withholding a pen from an officer with that authoritative, arrogant approach of not wanting to release it. Now, we saw that in the public, full view of the public via media. How many situations that we cannot see? Now, whilst we sit and we sensationalize the situation of the fire officers, because of course the nature of their jobs and they're on strike, we too have to understand what have they gone through that has not been addressed. We must take it from all angles because they're human beings. Yes, they're in Their jobs are very critical to our everyday life. Yes, we understand that. But then have their situations been addressed? One of the situations they wanted addressed, look, we have a problem with the high-handedness of our chief. We have a problem with the high-handedness of our officers, of our senior officers and our management. Have those issues been addressed? Because we cannot just expect them to just say, okay, we're not striking because the chief was transferred.
Yeah,
yes, he was transferred. What are the other issues that you all have addressed?
Yes, I think I'll bring the minister in at this point. Thank you so much for your contribution. Minister, I want to speak about, firstly, the response to that report, the response to the Commission of Inquiry. Yeah. She's suggesting that there was no engagement. Well, I know that
that's entirely true. And first and foremost, this idea that the association only fairly recently got the report is absolutely untrue. You must remember that the report was even tabled in Parliament.
Yeah, so it's public.
So it became a public document, and the association, in fact, had the report very early after the report officially came out.
Because so you were referencing it.
Yes, any suggestion that it's only, within the last few weeks that they've been privy to the report is not the case. The second point is that in the Commission of Inquiry report itself, there is, for example, an illustration. I've forgotten the page number, but I can probably find it because I have the document right here. But there is an illustration of ongoing government activity over the years to try to resolve that. In fact, there's an instance that they point quite forcefully to, in which the ministry took the position to direct the chief fire officer to take a certain course of action in relation to the fire service. And in fact, as a result of his failure to take that course of action, the ministry had to again get involved and write to the chief fire officer. And all these are referenced in the document. So, and I say that I'm not even going into other things. I'm saying that if you read the document itself, yes, you can see that a lot of what is being said is absolutely inconsistent with the findings in the document. And we continued even after this to engage the fire service and to find ways to try and resolve this issue. I, as ministers have said, I have met with all of the parties on a number of occasions, and I have met with the fire chief and my staff on a number of occasions with a view to try to regularize some of the things that we deemed as a ministry to be going in the wrong direction in the fire service. And so the record is really for everyone to see.
We have another call. Good night, you're on the air. Hello, good night. We've lost that call. We'll continue to take your calls at 452-7347 if you have a contribution to make or a question to ask. Good night, you're on the air.
Hi, good night.
Good night.
Good evening.
What I just wanted to, I guess, echo the last caller slightly, but just to talk about the time span in which things are handled. I mean, we have many degrees. We have masters. We go to school to learn how to handle things, to come and manage things. How long does it take it has to take the government or the parties that be to handle things before they fester to a point where now these fire officers have to strike? I mean, as anything else, everything has a process, but I think the time, there's a lot of talk, and things seem to be taking very long, not only, under this administration, but just generally. It's not a political statement. It's the fact that if people are in positions to handle things, how long can you have things going on that to the point where the fire officers are now having to strike? Obviously, there's been a length of time that has passed, and I just find, whether it's inefficiencies, whether it's, ineffectiveness, I really don't understand why things have to take so long. And it's not only this. It's a number of things in different areas, different ministries, different problems. I mean, we seem to, do we know what we are doing? Are we hiring, the proper people in the positions to handle things? Do we have proper managers? I mean, we seem to have many degrees sitting around tables and nothing is coming out. Many egos, nothing. I really don't understand. And that's what I would like, the minister or JD, you yourself, just in the whole discussion, the issue of time and handling issues, because we're really looking inefficient right now.
Thank you so much for your contribution, caller. The time, the
Well,
process.
as I have pointed, Mrs. Japie-Emmanuel, a number of things have been happening
Over time.
And you also have to understand that this issue is also an inter-ministerial issue, because it's not just the Ministry of Home Affairs and National Security that acts in this matter, but many of the things that come to us have to be passed on, in a sense, to the Ministry of the Public Service, and from the Ministry of the Public Service to the Public Service Commission. Now, I believe that the last caller has a bit of a point in terms of the time factor, because one of the things that happened when I got into office and we evaluated this situation, for example, is that we found that a number of matters that had come to the ministry had either stayed there, or some of them had gone to the Public Service Commission, and there was a slowness in dealing with a number of these disciplinary matters. In fact, it is my understanding that some of the matters that had been before the Public Service, in terms of disciplinary matters, over the last few years, the Public Service Commission could not advance these matters because of the length of time that they had sat there, and as a result of the length of time, obviously evidence may not be available, people may have gone their separate ways, some may be out of the country, some have died, and so on. So I believe the caller has some measure of merit in the point that we need to progress these things at a faster speed. But I also believe that there were and there are some genuine issues that have to be addressed in relation to the fact that the minister cannot simply take decisions on a lot of these matters. He can take decisions, and his permanent secretary and staff can take decisions as to how these matters should go, where they should go, how they should be advanced, but there's always an interdependency to ensure that these matters can be properly addressed.
We have another call. Good night, you're on the air.
Hi, good night, JJ. Good night to the
Good
minister.
evening.
Good night to you.
Yeah, my question is in relation with the discretion that is dispensed, or the discretion that is allowed by magistrates. It can become frustrating, not just to police, it can also become frustrating to the civilians.
Where difficulty hearing
Caller, can you speak a little louder, please?
I'm speaking as loud as I can.
Well, that's better. That's better.
Okay.
Yes.
My problem is with the discretion that is allowed by magistrates and how they use them. If a law is set, for instance, over the weekend, the Babonneau police arrested a gentleman with 2 magazines and 61 rounds of ammunition. A search was conducted at his home the following, I think, this morning, and they retrieved a 9mm with another magazine and 8 rounds. And I think bail was given for $1,000, and then $2,000 in another case. I think one for the firearm, one for the ammunition. Where the laws of Somerset is asking for a steep, when somebody alone, one man alone, is walking with 69 rounds, that's 69 lives he can take with a 9mm. And that 69, it can still take more than the 69. When that person is billed for $2,000, when on a firearm, I think on firearm for 1 round it's supposed to be $1,000 bill, the firearm is much more, 10,000. When they become so lenient, it's just a slap in the face of the police who have to do all of these things. And sometimes the police go through so much, going through these things, going through people's homes. You see the media comes with all different kind of views and opinions from the person's end. And when you go through doing these investigations, and the bail, I even thought they said that there was no bail on firearms. But when somebody can be caught with a firearm today or is out on the street tomorrow, you just have $3,000, they can get that just like that. The question, these are some of the things that really affects the work police has to do and everything. So I just want that the minister can address that first.
Thank you so much.
This is an issue primarily for the courts.
Yes.
I cannot get involved in the issue of how a magistrate should sentence or how a judge should sentence. This is purely a matter for the courts. What we do from time to time is assess the legislation with a view to looking at penalties and other issues. And in fact, a few years ago, there was an amendment, if I recall, to the Firearms Act to increase some of the penalties. So we do that from time to time, but at the end of the day, it's the judge or magistrate taking into account all of the surrounding facts. And very often, I'm a lawyer by profession, and I'm always a little guarded from another point of view, and that is, very often, people on the outside just see the very basic thing. Somebody was arrested with this or that. But as the case progresses, the magistrate or the judge is the one who is able to view all of this evidence. Sometimes it could be that the person has cooperated with law enforcement, and that cooperation has led to other things. So we don't know the basis upon which, I mean, when I say we, I'm saying you and I sitting here,
public, yeah.
and the public sometimes may not know the basis upon which the magistrate or the judge is exercising their responsibility. And so the courts have that responsibility. I can say that from the government's point of view, there are times that we feel the need to update or amend or bring in new legislation, such as in relation to the Anti-Gang Act.
Yes.
Where we felt that we needed to fill a void that was there. So that is what the government can do in this sort of situation. But in terms of the actual dispensation of justice, it's not for the executive to get involved in this at all.
Good night, caller. You on the air? Hello.
Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you for calling.
I'm just calling reference. Mr. Minister, how many DCPs do you have in the police force? And why is Mr. Moses Charles still on administrative leave?
Thank you so much.
One more question. How many gangs are in St. Lucia with that anti-gang law that has been passed on? Thank you.
Thanks for your questions. Mr. Minister, he asked about how many DCPs are in the Royal St. Lucia Police Force and was asking for an explanation as to why Mr. Moses Charles is still on leave.
Well, Mr. Moses Charles was placed on leave by the Public Service Commission, not by the minister. So I think it would certainly be inappropriate for me to purport to give a decision of the Public Service Commission. But my understanding is that at some point, of course, if I'm not mistaken, I think he may have challenged the matter also on appeal. I'm subject to correction here, but I think he may have challenged this matter. The other question of the deputy commissioners, obviously there are two spots. And I believe what the individual is basically alluding to is that if he's on leave, it therefore blocks one of the spots for deputy commissioner. So I suspect that's what the person is alluding to.
And he was also asking about the anti-gang legislation. I seem to get from his tone of voice, he's saying that the legislation is not really necessary, it's not needed.
Well, in his view, that's always a view that someone could have on anything. But the government assessed the situation, and let me say that the anti-gang legislation is in fact in effect now. And we are in the process of mounting some workshops for the police by way of sensitizing them to some of the issues that are going to surround the implementation of that legislation. But I would certainly disagree with anyone who says that this legislation is really not needed at this point in time.
Good night, caller.
Good night, Julia.
Good evening. Good evening.
Yeah, I noticed people have been playing away from the real issues. That's why sometimes when you come on the TV station or radio, people complain. When you come, they don't address the issues supposed to be addressed. They come in for other things. Now, I noticed the whole saga that have been going on with the fire service. I've been a long man. It could be 3-4 years. But since you all have been trying your utmost best to do what you are supposed to do, and listening to you, I realize the word you have been using from the time you started, responsibility. This is something I've always been talking about, responsibility. And when I hear certain persons, like trade union leaders, telling me and other persons that workers are not responsible for any deficit or whatever aspect it may be, they are not responsible for that. I am saying to you today, the statement you are making is professional statement you're making, a statement that is due of making, and if the fire service were using they were thinking in a more sociological or psychological way, and use the professionalism in it, then things would have worked out the best way and proper way. But I find their way of the way they talk or they speaking, there is an arrogantness in it, emotional, and to my mind, from what I gather from Baptist, James and all of them, I don't know, there is just something in it that sounds to me not only arrogant, but trouble. They know everything. They're pretending they don't know nothing. They're pretending they never met with you. And all sorts of things have been taking place in the fire service. And what even make it worse, when I listen to the president of the Civil Service Association, I listen to the president of the CUF, it begs the question, where St. Lucia have to go, or where St. Lucia will be heading to. Because I will say to you today, and JDF, whatever taking place in this country right now, they are not doing it to hurt you, Mr. Lacobinier, Dr. Kenny D. Anthony, Emma Hippolyte, and the government at large. They're doing it to hurt themselves and St. Lucia, because you're all there today, tomorrow you are not there.
Yes,
it's time for themselves to get up on their feet and be professional, think more sociological or psychological, and be social conscience type of people in this country. And if it's like that we have to go, St. Lucia will reach nowhere, because the social fabric of this country was left behind from time of immemorial, and when one trying to correct it, do things in its proper perspective, proper way, and refuse to adhere to it, it's trouble you want to cause. I was saying to myself, if I was in place of the Public Service Commission, I'll transfer all of them, I'll fire them, because these fellas are just there to make mischief. And I'll take the opportunity to say something where one of the executives of the Civil Service Association told me a few Saturdays back, I have Kenny Anthony and the CSA by their balls.
Wow.
All right? So I'll say the rest to Shelton Daniel when I call him.
Sure. Thank you so
much. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your contribution, caller. We will take a final call.
Let me, if I can just come in before you take the final call.
Sure.
I just want to say that industrial action is a prerogative of any association, any employee, and in a sense it's healthy in a society, in the sense that you will get to points where you may need to have industrial action.
Yes.
But the point is that it can't be industrial action to a point that destroys everything that you have built over the last 25 years or 100 years. It cannot be industrial action that allows people to die and people to callously look away and say, well, so be it. It cannot be industrial action that pays no attention to the fact that the fire service is less than 400 people. What is the population of St. Lucia? What is the population of persons who are adults in St. Lucia, for example? The point I'm making is that the fire service fits into a context. Yes. It's not on its own. It fits into a context. It's in a society where there are people, there are other persons who also have a greater say in the society than this small number of persons. So there's a context that they find themselves in, and they cannot be advancing their cause as if there's absolutely no context. Because one of the things that will begin to happen very soon is that the public is going to begin to take the fire service to account on these issues, because it can't continue to go on like this without accountability. And if they are unprepared to do it in the context of their understanding of their role in the society and where they stand as a critical agency that must have a basic level of responsibility, then the public will take them to account. And the public will take them to account because you have an elected government that has been elected by a lot more than 300 or 400 persons. And you have a body of persons in the country who have elected a government to govern and to ensure that there's safety and the society is able to run not just in an efficient way, but in a way where you ensure public safety and the respect for human life.
We have
And the
a
Fire
caller on
Association
air.
must also understand
Sure. Thank you so much for holding, caller. Go ahead with your contribution.
Yeah,
Sorry.
good night, JJ, and thank you, Minister. In fact, my question relates directly to the last point that the Minister made relating to the context within which the fire service operates.
Sure.
And I wanted to find out whether there is provision within the essential services legislation that prohibits fire officers from taking industrial action without giving adequate notice. And if that is so, that whether the actions of the fire officers are legal. Because I was thinking our society that our legislation would protect the citizens from such actions. And if these actions are really done by such officers, then there ought to be some sort of redress on behalf of the citizens of the state. Because I'm feeling as if we are taken for ransom. I understand that employees would have grievances and would try or would attempt to address these grievances in a particular way. But for essential services to just be able to willy-nilly take industrial action, put the country at ransom, put our lives at risk, and we have no sort of redress, no way in which we can protect each and every one of us, then, you know, I am lost as to the particular situation that's happening in our society.
Thank you so much for your contribution. Minister, is the fire service an essential service in the context of the legislation?
It's a matter that the Honorable Attorney General has been looking at, because from our point of view and looking at it from the ministry's point of view, it appeared to be a bit of a gray area. And in fact, the Attorney General is looking at that because we felt, in fact, it was a bit of a gray area. The law was not very clear on that. But the caller is quite right that in the past we have brought on essential services where governments have felt that these services, there has to be that minimum responsibility. But minimum responsibility in industrial relations is not simply an issue of the law, because the government can, through its majority, legislate and may well have to do that if sense cannot prevail. And when I say sense cannot prevail, if we are going down a road where there is absolutely no sense of responsibility. So one has to understand that, yes, there is a legal way to address some of this and to make it very clear in one way or another. But beyond the law, there has to be in our industrial relations a basic sense of responsibility. If there isn't a basic sense of responsibility, what happens at the hospitals? Assuming that your hospitals were not covered by essential services. If a doctor wants to strike and you have 10 critical cases waiting to be operated upon, he just picks up himself and says, well, I'm going on strike, and he goes and lets the 10 people die. That can't be the way that we run our industrial relations in the country. And that is the way that the fire service is taking us down that road.
My understanding
It
is
can't be that.
there are individuals who have been denied ambulance services as
Yes,
a
there
result
have
of the
been.
action.
There have been people denied ambulance service as a result of the action. And as I have said, there's been absolutely no attempt by the fire service to put in place a minimum. Because the industrial action, one can understand if that has to be, and that is the mechanism. Although I certainly don't agree that the situation was ripe for it or is ripe for it. But if that has to be, you put in place a minimum, understanding the responsibility that you have to the country and understanding your special role in relation to what you do. And this is absolutely absent in what has been happening here.
Minister, just as we prepare to end the program, I want to ask about the contingency plans. St. Lucians, many of them, particularly those who have requested the services of the St. Lucia Fire Service recently, are a bit anxious and a bit on edge as to how we will avert any major national disaster. what contingency plans are in place, or can you at least give the assurance that the government is sufficiently prepared should the Fire Service Association decide to continue and prolong its strike action?
Well, the government in the past has put certain measures in place. We have activated those measures, and those measures include, if the need be, that we will pull people from within the region to support this exercise. But let me make it very clear, and I'm making it very clear, that this cannot continue. The country is not going to go down this road, and the government is going to stand by and allow the country to be ruined by 300 plus. Well, it's less than 300, because you must remember, it may be 100 or 150 fire officers. This is just not going to happen. And it's not a threat, it's just a reality that no government, be it this government of the St. Lucia Labour Party or the United Workers' Party, no government can stand by and allow a country to be destroyed by 150 people. And those 150 people to feel, because they have the support of the civil service trade union, that it is okay, it will not be all right in the morning on this one, I can assure you.
Thank you so much for tuning in to In Touch on Choice TV and live on RSL 97. This is all our time for our program this week. You heard from Senator Honorable Victor Philip Lacobine on matters related to the fire service and, of course, the Royal St. Lucia Police Force. This week was our first program. Guaranteed we'll be back with you In Touch on Monday night on Choice TV. Enjoy the rest of your week.
Thank you.